Okay, so welcome back. This time we're doing a complete history of World War One in Countryballs. World War One is not something that I know as much about as World War Two or other things. Also got from some feedback that I talk way too long in these videos, so I'm going to try and pause less, say less things, let you guys enjoy. We're also going to be experimenting with edited videos coming up in the future, so we'll see about that. As always, come find me on Twitch and join the Discord, which is link is in the description below, to see the schedule, see when I'm streaming, and come join the community, come chat, whatever you'd like. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Didn't work again. It's not as dramatic.
This nice and clean map of Europe has a lot more dirt than you might think it does, and it's only going to get messier from here.
Also, I love Countryballs.
What's going on now, what was going on before, and what is going to happen later. Spoilers, a fight breaks out and destroys a good chunk of everybody.
Yes. So this guy never made, he was going to make a World War II version of this, but he never ended up making it.
Southeast Europe, known as the Balkans, was always a hot mess. Let's look at one kingdom here, Serbia. This one, as of now, fairly small kingdom has an undying urge to expand. When they failed in taking a region with a high population of Serbs, Bosnia, they looked south. And what is actually south of them? Just a ton of their Christian pals that are waiting to escape a Muslim empire. This is the Ottoman Empire. It doesn't have a very good reputation with the rest of the gang here, so everybody has a little bit of a score to settle with them. The four kingdoms of Bulgaria, Greece, Serbia, and Montenegro band together, and the Balkan League is assembled, ready to take the Ottomans out of Europe, and on October of 1912, they begin their attack. To say the very least, this did not end well for the Ottomans. All four kingdoms...
Yeah, so I mean, this was really the beginning of the fall of the Ottoman Empire as well, and it just got worse from here. My God, did it just get worse from here. 1914 was really not a good year for the Ottomans, and yeah, it just continued. I mean, not even just 1914. Between really the whole 20th century, arguably, was really not good for the Ottomans, and it just gets worse from here.
Took a nice chunk of land with them, and now there's an independent state, Albania. Even though massive gains were made on the Balkan League side, the largest and most powerful kingdom, Bulgaria, was not pleased with their share of a region known as Macedonia to the people who live there, and former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia to the people who don't live there. Bulgaria invades their former best friends in June of 1913. We'll fight for this land that is rightfully
and it doesn't
ours,
go
and we
well.
shall be remembered for it. Victory belongs to us, the people of Bulgaria. They failed and gave up in a month.
Yeah.
So now we have a collapsing empire trying to survive. One kingdom displeased with their war profits. One kingdom attempting to unite all Serbs, but a bit north of them, a huge empire who is still holding Bosnia, full of Serbia's people. Everyone get mad, because Serbia isn't stopping. In late June of 1914, a Serbian nationalist by the name of Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Franz.
That should be the Austro-Hungarian flag, but whatever.
Ferdinand of Austria. A month later, war breaks out between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. Directly after, Russia declares war on Austria-Hungary for declaring war on Serbia. Afterwards, Germany declares war on Russia for declaring war on Austria-Hungary for declaring war on Serbia.
Spirals out of
control. Second to lastly, France declares war on Germany for declaring war on Russia for declaring war on Austria-Hungary for declaring war on Serbia.
Yeah.
And finally, UK declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary because that's what friends do. So let's get started.
And that's what friends do, right? And then it plunges the whole all of Europe into war. And I think one thing that he didn't touch on is the UK didn't just immediately declare war. I hope we'll get into this, but this was because of the Schlieffen Plan, where they went through Belgium. I'm sure he'll touch on this, but it wasn't that, oh, France is at war, time to declare war. It was when Germany, they went through neutral Belgium, violated the treaty that had existed, I mean, what, centuries prior, I believe? Yeah, centuries prior, or maybe a few decades, I'm not sure off the top of my head, and violated their neutrality, getting the UK to declare war, which Germany didn't think they would do. I think he'll touch on that, though, but let's just clear that up.
Germany weren't at good terms even before this war began. As a result, their direct border was heavily guarded, but Germany didn't exactly plan on playing by the rules.
Yeah, okay, there we go. Okay, good.
Since going under, over, or through the border wasn't an effective option, why not just go around it? Following this train of thought is exactly what Germany did. In early August of 1914, Germany went on to attack through Luxembourg and Belgium in order to get to France. While their initial attack was effective, they stopped advancing by September and found themselves locked in a stalemate. Both sides dug trenches and stopped moving until late March of 1917. So as the British might say, let's skip across the pond for a moment to see how the US is doing.
Is really
attempting to stay neutral.
Okay.
As far as a distant tragedy that shouldn't
going straight to the US.
Feeling a bit bad for Belgium, who got trampled on by German troops. Because of this, Herbert Hoover, who would later become the president of the U.S., organized the Commission for Relief in Belgium, where supplies needed for a living that generally most Belgians did not have at this point were brought to them. Other than this, however, the U.S. was having a jolly okay time taking stuff over in the Pacific like the rest of the Europeans would have. So, with that being said, things in the Americas are pretty calm as of now. Now let's go back to Europe to look at Serbia and Austria-Hungary and what they're up to. Nothing. For the first entire year of the war, very few advances had occurred between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Even though these two were at each other's throats during the first couple of days, Austria-Hungary's priority changed quickly as Russia started gnawing on their eastern border. The front lines here were back and forth. Germany and Austria-Hungary only began making significant gains after a counteroffensive took place during May of 1915. Now, who are we forgetting about? The Ottomans, of course. Let's not forget about the Ottomans, who joined the war on the 29th of October of 1914.
Wrong side, my friends.
They were just a tad late to the party, but they stayed up until the very end. Upon their arrival,
literally the end,
2x4 to the back of their head, also known as
collapse of their empire.
Whatever you want to call it, it was quickly repelled by mid-November. The Ottomans went a bit further and decided to attempt to invade Russia in midwinter, but just like before, this attack was repelled the next month. The Ottomans were not entirely happy with this move. On top of an empire that is collapsing due to problems with ethnic diversity, now they have a bruised military force and can't fight as well on foreign soil. So, like any logical thinker...
And that's one of the fascinating things, too, between the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, is that they ran into the same issues. They have a very diverse force of different ethnic groups, different languages, right? All sort of fighting, all sort of trying to be cohesive and fight sort of the same enemy. And obviously, between the Armenians and the Kurds, right, and between, for example, the Czechs and the Hungarians in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it's very difficult to keep an empire together when you're really fighting an enemy that not everyone wants to fight, right, for reasons that might not even be clear to a lot of the populace. So really, with this war being the death of empires, it really being more autonomy in Europe along sort of ethnic and cultural lines is why why World War I is really, really fascinating. And I think the consequences of World War I sometimes can be more fascinating than the events themselves. At least that's just my personal take on it. I'm really big into World War II. I've been learning about it since I was a small child. But it's still really interesting to learn more about World War I. It certainly has a big place in Canada's history, too.
The 1480s, they walked right into ethnic Armenian territory and proceeded to do things that would probably get my video blocked in modern-day Turkey. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now, as of May of 1915, let's take a look at the standings.
And that's still a controversial...
stalemate.
Well, not even controversial. That is still a very
and
large
Germany
issue
and France have not moved
day.
at all. But now Germany is advancing into Russian territory faster than before.
I think he handled that well.
Between May and October, Germany had entirely captured the Duchy of Warsaw and is making quick moves into Russia's Baltic holdings. Just as things have really started to heat up between Germany and Russia, Serbia is seeing their last couple of months in this war. On the other hand, the US is getting really mad about Germany sinking their favorite boat, the Lusitania. The US is starting to reconsider being neutral in this conflict, and this is about the second to last straw they can hold before it breaks their back. So you remember Bulgaria? Yeah, Bulgaria remembers Bulgaria. On October 14th of 1915, the previously mentioned Bulgaria, who was still disappointed about the outcome of the last Balkan War, decided to take the opportunity of seeing Serbia completely vulnerable and united in cooperation with Austria-Hungary. Within 2 months, Serbia was destroyed. Bulgaria made off with a good chunk of their land, but Serbia wasn't entirely finished. So I hope you were following before, because I'll warn you, it only gets more confusing from here on out. Within the last couple of days, Serbia's army evacuated into neighboring Albania and Greece, and continued fighting from there. So, with mainland Serbia defeated, the war should end, right? Well, nope, unfortunately,
not even close.
Europe has already turned into a melting pot of chaos, and they're not showing any sign of stopping. Everyone had done enough to piss each other off, it seems, and now they all have a score to settle. A score they can only...
And Bulgaria is the happiest out of all.
Settle with more... A lot more blood is to be bled, so let's keep bleeding, shall we? Ever since the defeat of Serbia, things have slowed down until April, when Russia decided to drop a few more 2x4s on the Ottomans' heads. And then in June, Russia took back land from the Germans. Making a bit of a comeback, Romania joined the Allies in late August of 1916 and invaded Austria-Hungary. It went nicely until September, when Bulgaria attacked from the south, diverting Romania's attention. Romania was fought out of Austria-Hungary through October, and through the next 3 months proceeded to be steamrolled. So besides Romania being steamrolled and the fact that this is a war, of course, things are actually getting pretty quiet. This relative silence would all be ruined when Germany...
And what's interesting, too, about the Romania push is how effective Bulgarian troops were in fighting that war as well, and really the overall effectiveness of Bulgarian troops in the war. I don't think is really known to a lot of people. I've obviously heard about it from those Balkan boys in the Twitch streams. But Bulgaria's role in this part of the war, and almost the whole war, is actually really quite important.
Decided to poke the U.S. with a stick once again. On January 19th of 1917, Germany attempted to send a telegram to Mexico, but the message was intercepted by the UK and was forwarded to the U.S.
I don't know.
This was known as the Zimmer
Whoever
telegram.
thought of this? Some poor
Germany
intern, some poor policy intern. Guy to be fired. Actually, is probably Kaiser. I don't know who actually.
Telegram, Germany essentially said, "Hey Mexico, if you want to help me destroy the U.S., I'll help you get your
Good God, what a terrible idea."
Of course, Mexico's never getting a say in this since the U.S. received the telegram before Mexico did. Too bad for Germany.
And not only that, but Mexico was in such disarray after their civil war. So
to reach out to make a new friend.
Whoever thought of this
after
one?
receiving this telegram, the United States declared war on Germany.
Was it actually Arthur Ringman?
So now while the U.S. is gearing up for battle, Europe is just now thawing out from doing pretty much nothing all winter. The action would kickstart after France won the Battle of Verdun, Verdois, and began making gains against the Germans in March. But after a short time, they got
my
stuck
German's
again.
much better than my French.
Much more drawn-out mustard gas attacks, trench foot, massacres, and vomiting ensues throughout the entire year. Fast forward to November of 1917, and Russia spontaneously has a revolution.
Yes.
There's communists now, and they want to overthrow the Russian government. Now Russia has to fight the Ottomans, Austria-Hungary, Germany, and now they have to fight themselves too. Of course, nobody can fight in Siberia except for Russia during the winter, but Russia's already fighting with Russia, so obviously Russia does not stand a chance. In December, Russia capitulates. They pull out of the war, but they end up paying a massive exit fee. Signing the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, Russia loses Ukraine, Estonia, Latvia, Livonia, Lithuania, Finland, Poland, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, 25% of their population, 90% of their coal industry, and they pay 6 million German marks for damages.
Right, and just to sort of go on that, I mean, they talk about the Treaty of Versailles being the harshest treaty of all of them, but I really think that the treaty that the Austro-Hungarian Empire had to sign that basically stripped everything from them, everything, right, as well as the Brest-Litovsk treaty, where you lose a quarter of your population, especially in the highly productive regions here that are closer to Europe, right? 90% of your coal, and you have to pay $6 billion. And unfortunately, I don't know what that would be in modern US dollars, but I would imagine a lot, right? And out of your previous states, there's what, one, two, three, four, five, right? It looks like there's like 10 or so here, new countries that are formed out of your former republic. Sorry, not republic, your former empire. Right, so incredibly harsh treaty from the Russians, and as the next 30 years or so, they would gain back a lot of this territory and more.
Quickly, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottomans rush in to occupy the surrendered territories. Even though Russia as a whole had already surrendered, these territories were still not.
Also, the joyful music while this is happening, just, I don't know, there's some sort of tone thing here.
As a result, it took most of the Central Powers' troops to secure this land. Because of this, they were even weaker on every other active front. If you think this would make the US think twice about trying to fight Germany, who just capitulated a giant bear not long ago, then you would be wrong. In January of 1918, the U.S. President Woodrow Wilson outlines what is called the 14 Points, a set of principles that could be put into place after the war to ensure peace will remain in Europe and that further conflict over basically the same things would be avoided. Simplified, they are as followed. Section 1. There will be no secret treaties. If 2 or more countries have to agree to something, you bet everybody else is going to know they agreed to it. Section 2. Freedom of access to the sea, whether during times of peace or times of war. Essentially, this is a discreet way of telling Germany that sinking everybody's boats in international water was not a very nice thing to do. Section 3, the establishment of free trade. You can probably imagine that people would stop selling guns to each other if they knew that the buyer was going to use the guns on them. The economic immobility that took place during World War I also restricted a lot of trade of food. Because of this, there is a pretty significant famine everywhere.
Yeah, it had this on top of the British naval blockade too, which was incredibly effective against the Germans. that really did restrict their access to food.
Section 4. The
as well as other things.
provokers of this war will have their armies dulled down to use defense forces. Of course, it isn't totally necessary to spend more than 10% of your entire gross domestic product just to build more killing machines, right? Section 5. The Empire's colonial claims will be adjusted, or in other terms, the Allies are going to take the Central Powers
everything
for themselves. These will be administered in what are called mandates later. Section 6. The Russian territories will be evacuated, and afterwards, everyone will let Russia decide their own fate in the ongoing civil war.
Unfortunately.
Yeah,
Section
that sort
7,
of happened.
Germany.
That really should be a picture of Lenin, though, not Stalin, but okay.
Seriously, get out of Belgium, that's illegal. Section 8. Germany should probably also get out of France. About 50 years prior to this war, Germany had taken over Alsace-Lorraine.
Yeah.
France was mad, and so was everybody else, apparently. Section 9.
We'll get into
Italy
that
will be
during
adjusted
the
so that anyone deemed
during
an
some of the
Italian
other
will be
videos I'll be
within their
reacting to
borders.
too.
This mainly concerns Austria-Hungary, but surprisingly not San Marino. Section 10.
And what's fascinating too about Südtirol is that, I mean, to this day, Italy owns it, but it is a German-speaking, Austrian ethnically, so to say. Don't want to go along those lines too much. Speaking region where the government that's actually elected there, they're all German speakers, right? And it's I don't remember the party name off the top of my head, but it's quite a rich region, and it's very culturally tied to Austria to this day.
Austria-Hungary, the beautiful patchwork of different languages and ethnicities, is to let all these other ethnicities decide what they want to do for themselves.
I mean, look at this, right? Just the absolute shattering of the empire, right? Just absolute shattering of the empire that went to, or that was proposed here, but then also eventually did happen to the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Or in freedom terms, we'll give them independence.
Section 11. Romania, Serbia, and Montenegro are to be got out of by the Central Powers and have their stolen territories given back to them. Serbia will be given free, undisturbed access to the sea, Balkans will be organized along lines of national allegiance, and independence will be guaranteed for all of them. Nice job. Section 12. The Ottoman Empire will be partitioned along lines of ethnicity. The Turkish majority portion will be given independence as its own Turkish nation, while other ethnicities will be given the right to decide to rule amongst themselves.
404.
Just like Kurdistan, I'm sure. This section also promises that the Turkish Straits will be internationally administered and will be open to anybody sailing through. Section 13. A Polish state will be given independence in areas that are undeniably majority Polish. They will also be given access to the sea and a promise of undisturbed independence.
Oh, if only they could predict the future.
And finally, Section 14, the League of Nations will be formed as an organization made up of great powers who will assure that everyone will be able to maintain their independence and that generally stuff gets enforced. Even though the United States has made a pretty confident statement about the future of the world, the Central Powers still kept at it. After spending most of night...
And one other thing I want to touch on with the United Nations too, what's so funny is that even though Woodrow Wilson was so for joining the United Nations and creating the United Nations, that actually never happened because Congress ratified against him and actually denied the United States ever joining the League of Nations. So the United States didn't join the League of Nations upon its foundation in 1918, despite Woodrow Wilson's wishes, due to Congress, which is a little funny, to be honest, and might have been, obviously there are a lot of reasons why the League of Nations didn't work, but not having the United States there, I think, was definitely an issue when it came to the legitimacy and the effectiveness of the League of Nations overall. Though again, it is more complicated than that.
The U.S. had already deployed to France and began driving the Germans out.
It's not just like, America solves everything. Don't get me
Bulgaria
wrong.
surrenders. On the last day of October of the same year, the Ottomans lay down their arms. The 3rd of November, and Austria-Hungary recoils in fear as they are attacked from all sides. And of November 11th, Germany is finished. And thus, a victory was secured for the Allies. Surely this can't be the end, can it? Do not worry, because at least 17 million people did not die for no reason. The world is going to look a whole lot different from now on. So now let's look at how Europe will be reshaped. First we'll look at Austria,
until it was reshaped
which went
again.
From a beautiful stained glass window to a harmful, bloody, and ugly pointy mess of broken glass. First of all, the land that's inhabited by Czechs and Slovaks is given independence, forming Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
Second, Serbia and Montenegro unite, and further annex what is known today as Bosnia, Croatia, Slovenia, and this thing to form what is familiar to many as the Kingdom of
Vojvodina,
Yugoslavia.
I think.
Trentino was ceded to Italy, of course, because it's pretty easy to deem the people there Italians.
Transylvania was ceded to Romania, and from then on, vampires became a Romanian stereotype again. Galicia, which is inhabited by many Poles, was ceded to the not yet complete Polish Republic. Finally, of course, the kingdoms of Austria and Hungary are now two separate entities. Now onto Bulgaria, they were able to hold on to their Serbian land for the duration of the war, but now they're forced to give it back. To Greece, they lost their direct access to the Aegean Sea. They were also required to shrink their absurdly large military down to a size of just 20,000 men and pay for all the stuff they broke. And yes, they did break Serbia, so guess who's getting all the money? The Ottomans' fate was...
Right, and that's the thing too, some of the punishments that were doled out upon these nations were just incredibly severe. And it's almost no wonder that there was such a pushback against it, a few decades later, which really was this was sort of the beginning, arguably the Second World War, and sort of began, so to say, as soon as the First World War ended. Obviously, that's up for debate. This is not my realm of expertise for World War One, and not that I'm an expert in World War Two either. I just like the subject. But still, this is cool to see this sort of overview as well of everything.
It was not entirely sealed until a few years after the war. An Armenian state was given independence, while Egypt, Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, and Kuwait were given to the British, and Lebanon and Syria were given to the French. Greece,
and these
France,
borders,
the UK, and Armenia attempted to wrestle down the Ottomans for the next couple of years, until they eventually settled and formed the modern-day Turkey. And for whatever reason, there's still no Kurdistan. Quick fun fact, it was proposed to cede Armenia to the United States as a mandate, but this idea was denied by the Senate. All for the sake of democracy, I suppose. And now for Germany, who for whatever reason everybody thinks started the war. Their Polish land, of course, is given to the newly established Polish state. Poland is also given access to the sea through the Polish corridor. This, among many other things, becomes very controversial later. Some land a bit south of this is ceded to Czechoslovakia, who also really recently emerged. The region of Alsace-Lorraine is returned to France after it was taken from them in an earlier conflict. Germany also ceded Memel to France, a region near Lithuania, but later on, Lithuania took it from them because it makes sense.
Balkanization.
To Denmark, northern Schleswig was ceded, despite them not doing much the entire time.
Literally nothing, too. And I believe it was... I just watched a video on this recently, but all of Schleswig-Holstein and the part to the south of it was supposed to all go to Denmark, just so the Germans couldn't have it. But Denmark actually said no and denied the territory because the people living there were obviously ethnically German. And I believe a referendum was had between Schleswig-Holstein and the southern part there. And the northern part actually voted to join Denmark, and the southern part decided to stay with Germany.
The city of Danzig, near East Prussia, was given independence as a free city-state.
Free city,
Belgium, who so sadly stepped on, received the regions of Eupen and Malmedy. And we're still not done. Far away across the ocean, or more specifically in Africa, the German colonies of Tanzania and Namibia are both given to Britain.
Completely redrawn
split
here.
Between the France and UK, and the regions that are today known as Rwanda and Burundi were given to Belgium.
But I'm still not done!
In the Pacific, Japan, who honestly was just here to make a profit, gains Germany's Pacific holdings above the equator, plus a small colony that used to be part of China. German Samoa was given to New Zealand, who at the time was still under British control, and the rest was given to Australia, who was also a British subject. Back into Europe for a moment, Germany's military was stripped of all things unnecessary for defending themselves. They were also required to remove military presence from the area west of the Rhine River.
Yes, the Rhine.
The area captured from what used to be the Russian Empire was to be returned, but since Russia doesn't exactly exist right now,
the areas are evacuated and eventually chaos sweeps back into them.
Finally, the last salt-covered nail in the open wounded coffin, Germany is now required to pay 132 billion marks, which in today's money is about
$442 billion.
Even though the treaties were set in stone and managed to please most of the Allies, there are still millions of people who are overall not happy since the conclusion of the war. Bulgaria lost even more, Germany had fallen, and now Austria and Hungary are weakened on their own. But even then, Italy still is a bit picky with what they earned after fighting. Soon enough, someone way too out of his mind is going to show up and try to recreate the Roman Empire. This was a very controversial treaty.
It's a bald
and
grammar school teacher.
Germany lost a bit too much for their own good. Their economy falls, and the German people are now angrier than ever before. They're starting to feel separated from each other after losing swaths of land. As the years progress through the quite literally depressing interwar period, Germany seeks to restore its glory. We'll give Europe until the 1930s before some Austrian painter comes to power and decides to make his dream come true. Until then, enjoy how relatively clean this map of Europe looks. It'll get even messier in the next 20 to 30
years, yeah. And the Weimar Republic was really a solution that pleased absolutely no one. right? The conservatives weren't happy because it was too liberal. The liberals weren't happy because it wasn't liberal enough, right? And obviously, there was lots of elements that were created. There were lots of elements within the Weimar Republic that were not happy with how it was created, how it was governed, how it was ruled, and it was quite a lot of chaos for Germany for many years. This map, I think we're all too familiar with. This is the beginning of Hoi 4. I'm curious though. This is one subject that I don't know a lot about. Is what were the Scandinavian countries doing during World War One? I'm like, what role did Norway play? Did Denmark play any role? I'm actually not sure. So maybe you guys could tell me in the comments there. I also just want to make one quick note too on the territories that were drawn up in the Middle East out of the Ottoman Empire. Not given any attention to any sort of ethnic or cultural lines, just lines in the sand that happen to look pretty on a map. And these consequences, I mean, we're still feeling them to this day in 2022 of this redrawing of the Middle East that has consequences to this day.
Years. So what lesson can we even learn from this? We cannot pin the blame on just one side exactly, and it's not like there was an obvious bad guys and good guys.
It's complicated.
At least not in continental Europe. Rather, the blame will be pinned on the main causes. M standing for militarism. Everyone was militarized, let's be honest. Everyone constantly had their armies fully armed and ready, and were about ready to snap at each other at any moment. A standing for alliances. Regardless of whether or not people thought assassinating Archduke Franz Ferdinand was such a brilliant idea, Russia only came to Serbia's aid because they had already established that they were good friends with each other. It isn't like Germany hated anybody either. They had only decided they needed to support Austria-Hungary because they had made an alliance with them. I standing for imperialism.
Yeah, the blank check.
Europe was getting crowded, but everyone still wanted to take stuff over. This applied to everyone. Italy liked taking over the Mediterranean, France and Britain liked taking over Africa, Serbia liked taking over other Serbs, and so did Bulgaria. Everyone was bound to take over something at some point. And standing for nationalism. Mostly this can be traced back to the one guy Gavril Princip. He had the plan to make a point of uniting all the Serbs by killing Franz Ferdinand, but of course, Bulgaria had essentially the same idea in mind, which is what drove them to beat the tar out of Serbia. Now that we know that not one side in particular was to blame for these 4 years of everybody dying, is there still any lesson we can learn besides overall not being a militarized, allied, imperialist nationalist? Well, there is one, and it applies anywhere. Just stop killing each other, it helps!
Yeah, and just overall too, I mean, what isn't talked about too a lot of the times, and what's something that I try to bring up in these videos is you got to think of all the people, right? The ordinary people like you and I, people watching this video, right? Me as well, of just the amount of people that suffered for really the egos of people in power, right? Of the egos of nations, the amount of the millions of men that died fighting for their countries, the millions of civilians who were killed, and all the other fallout effects of the collapse of the Russian Empire, the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? This would all compound into World War II. And so it really is a shame that the amount of people that suffered for these sort of reasons. It's just sad in that way. But overall, that was a good video. I would do a World War II one that he said he was going to do, but I think his channel's dead now. I haven't seen any activity on it in a year. But yeah, that was good. Again, World War I is not my forte. It's not where sort of my main interest lies. So please, if I got anything wrong, let me know in the comments. And yeah, we can discuss it and go from there. And if you guys have any suggestions, like I said, be sure to join the Discord and put in the video suggestions channel anything you want me to react to, and we'll go from there. So until next time, guys, take care.